first of all, do you want to follow with another question, or would you like me to try and talk to both your answer and Rick's at the same time?
I have
Please, go ahead, certainly.
Okay. Let me say this about the plan that was produced that I've got a copy here.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way in the world that they're going to approve that plan. I mean, that is so restrictive. They've already told you, apparently, that it's not going to be a B2. And I don't think this plan would even qualify for a B2. So my sense of it is they're going to turn that flat down, hopefully. Now, my concern is that twofold. One, the reputation of the city. But the second is that they will tell you, submit it, and we'll react to it. And then we'll be forever getting around to it again. So hopefully, I want to bring closure to this.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever you're going to present, I certainly would vote to encourage you to go over there and present it, and let's get it over with.
Thank you.
It's not that I'm quite happy about the fact you're going over there to present this thing, but this thing's going on and on and on and on.
Well, let me bring you up to date on it. First of all, we did ask for permission to do just what we did, and I'm not sure, Rick, who told you that we did one thing or the other. But the fact is, there were two pieces on the agenda. We spoke to both of them. The one that was primary in the city's purposes was to get funding for 4 and 22. We spoke directly to that. We heard an answer from the FAA saying that we needed to talk to Orlando about it. They, in general, told us about budgetary and authorization constraints. They mentioned that they were thinking about possibly, Orlando had been thinking about a 60-foot wide runway. Marty explained to them that when that had come up in relation to 1331, that we got bids both for 60-foot and for the current 100 or 150-foot, and it was actually more expensive to do a 60-foot runway because we had to cart away the cement that would have otherwise remained in place, and there was general head nodding about that being the possibility, but there was no decision per se made at that time. The second thing is we arrived at bringing the plan there and at Orlando from a trip that Mr. Schmueller and Mr. Marble and others made to MEA headquarters to talk with Lisa Waters, and it was very kind of him to provide the transportation. And Ms. Waters suggested that the plans in question could be brought to the FAA as concept questions, and that we would not be asking them for approval of these plans, but rather to get their feedback, and even more importantly, get their recommendations. And in my report to you, I reported that when we talked with them about the Gulf Shores area, that while at first the engineer was not so sure what options might be available, the head of that agency, he resonated to the notion that there were impacts on the value of the property and having to declare to potential buyers that the property was in a RPZ and so forth and so on. Then they moved on to discuss an area that Marty had discussed briefly with Rusty Chapman from FAA Atlanta, which was the possibility of moving the runway closer to the intercoastal waterway and thereby allowing more distance between the other end of the runway and Gulf Shores. That was a suggestion they suggest we talk to Orlando about. They also talked about the possibility of using, and this is jargon that you'll have to forgive me for, what they call EMAS, which is a kind of material at the end of a runway which retards the airplanes and makes more effective the safety zones. So basically, they encouraged us. In fact, the the head of the program said he would call Orlando that very afternoon, as soon as we left, and encourage them to consider our concern for that property, our concern for 4 and 22, for the funding of it. And so it wasn't one of those questions where, as you suggested, we got turned down. On the contrary, Benito said, I'll call them right now. And he named the people who were familiar to Mr. Black and to Mr. Fred Watts, Mr. Watts, as to who we would talk with. Now, that's one person's view, but I think I would be happy if Mr. Black would say that, you know, he would like to add additional light to that, or perhaps correct me if I'm off base on that. But I got the feeling that we had no promises, but some general encouragement toward 422. Also, the congressional meetings went very well, with people in the Congress saying they were quite willing to do help in this regard, but they weren't sure when the bills would go through the Congress and that kind. Marty, did you agree that we were told that he would call Orlando and ask them to consider this with us, including the possibilities of moving the runway closer in the EMAS and so forth?
Let me just do a couple things just to correct some of the technical details.
All right, good.
The bidding for 1331 was at 100 feet and 150 feet, never at 60. We never produced a set of plans. I think the 60 was the first time, as we've indicated to you previously, both Fred and I noticed several of the council members that had questions. The 60-foot width for 422 was a complete surprise. The first time I'd ever heard that was the meeting in Washington. That was for 422, not for 1331. We did bid two alternatives on 1331, 100 and 150, because FAA had concerns about what was more effective.
Okay.
So what we had proposed was that if FAA wanted three different widths, 60, 100, and 150, that would have to be bid alternatives as a way to do that. And we also mentioned to them that we had no plans designed nor engineered for 60-foot width for 422, and we identified our concerns that as the noise abatement runway, to go to a 60-foot width would dramatically undercut the ability for that segment of the airport to ever be used for a noise abatement for jet traffic, and therefore we really did not perceive that as a good opportunity.
And you did mention that it was more costly actually to do, would have been to do 100 than 150, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. And
Right.
in the end, we did get FAA to approve the entire width because the disposal and removal costs for that extra 50-foot of width ended up being more than simply the restructuring and rebuilding, rehabilitation. In addition, we talked not about shifting the runway, at least not for my terms. What I've gotten from my discussions from Rusty Chapman in Atlanta, from discussions with Orlando, and reconfirmed with the representatives in Washington, was that it may be possible to add takeoff length at the end of 422 toward the intercoastal waterway. That had a possibility in combination with EMAS materials at the end of the runway to shift the runway protection zone onto airport properties, and obviously we would need that to be engineered and designed. The primary discussion was with regard to the community plan that was presented. The mayor did present that over the course of the meeting. The primary discussion focused on that aspect. As the mayor indicates in his components, the FAA officials clearly indicated that they felt that the community plan that was presented, I believe Mr. Marble, Mr. Rafferty have taken ownership in the drawings that you presented, Mayor, for preparing that they had no interest whatsoever in approving those plans. They felt that they could not meet standard. However, if the city wanted to bring forth the other alternatives that we discussed, that would be appropriate to bring that to Orlando. I did not leave with the sense that they had any interest in discussing the plan that Mr. Rafferty and Mr. Marble presented, because it did not meet the engineering specifications or standards that FAA would find acceptable.
Very good.